and I'm making another video here for my YouTube channel where I've been discussing tarot and spirituality. Uh, it's been my habit to introduce something from my altar, and I will probably make another video devoted solely to my 5-month process of feeling called by the Morrigan, but I have added a statue here. It may be a little dim, but I'll bring it out for the other video. But I have added a statue on my altar of the Morrigan with drawn sword in one hand and crow in the other. The title of this video will be something like the Smith-Waite Tarot considers strange practices, and by that I mean spiritual practices. So I drew cards in two ways. One, I just opened my mind during meditation to a rune and cards that just came to me in that alpha state or gamma state of mind. And then secondly, I drew actual cards. The second, when I drew the cards, it was more for my personal practices, so I thought that would give more objectivity if needed, and just ask generally about strange spiritual practices for the kind of mental draw during meditation. So before I show the rune and cards, and one Oham stick as well, before I show those draws, by way of introduction, let me just say that by strange spiritual practices, I don't mean things that are commonly accepted, such as getting tattoos of the elements, or even things that might be kept in the broom closet, so to speak, because of family and friends not being open-minded, but things that would be more edgy, perhaps. And I would also qualify what I mean in doing these draws as their spiritual practices, or witchcraft type practices, so that I wouldn't consider something like cutting oneself, as in the TV show, I think it was an HBO special maybe, called Sharp Objects, in which the main character had a psychological obsession with cutting herself, not so much as a spiritual practice. So that, to me, that would be different from something like a blood brother ritual in Tom Sawyer, when Huck Finn and Tom cut and put their blood together, which was kind of a ritual. And so that, to me, that would be maybe considered a strange or unusual practice, but not merely psychological. I suppose you could throw in sex magic. That's been depicted a little bit on the, what is the show on CBS? Strange Magic, maybe? The title's escaping me. But there were a few maybe left-hand path practices that are known or in the public dialect that might not be commonly accepted. Something like, something borderline would be, I think, of initiation rites, and one from history in the Shaolin Temple, when the monks reached a certain stage, they would pick up a huge burning kettle in their arms, and it would sear the symbol into their forearms as they carried it in the ritual. And so anything with maybe pain involved or ingesting something, I suppose borderline would be something like taking peyote or hallucinogens for spiritual practice, I suppose. But this is the kind of thing I'm thinking of with spiritual intention. So as I opened my mind to the cards and meditation, the first thing that came quickly to mind was the rune Laguz. Here it is on a card. It can mean dark. I wanted to say darkness, but it can mean, I think, depth. It means lake or water. It can mean flow, the feminine principle, perhaps the deep, dark waters, the flexibility and flow are what came to my mind. That these practices are deep, they're not for everyone. There's some association with the underworld, and some people won't be able to see past the surface into the significance or meaning or power thereof. So, not a rigid, exoteric form, perhaps. I'm sure everything I say will be arguable, and that's great. So the first card that came to mind was the Two of Pentacles, the Two of Coins here. I'm using the Smith-Waite Centennial Edition of the tarot here. And this just speaks to me of maybe there's a balance in that the spiritual purpose maybe brings balance to what might otherwise be precarious, the physical pain or the drug use or what have you. So I think of warnings on cigarettes and alcohol, limits, disclaimers, and things. Even for oracle cards and tarot use, sometimes we see disclaimers and warnings against oracle abuse and things like that. So this also speaks of the flow and that kind of flexibility, balancing in that precarious situation, perhaps mentioned in the rune as well. The next card I drew was the Magician, and this just immediately spoke to me: as above, so below. The tools here evident on the Magician's table, the ceremonial tools, and that this for me just brings up the question: is it a practice with a spiritual connection? Is it a tool or a method rather than a addiction or psychological obsession? So that came to mind. And also the last tarot card that came to mind during meditation was the Chariot. And thanks to Anna, Astral Lady from Amsterdam, in a recent video talking about her pet peeves of the Chariot interpretations, who said it's not always just a race and something that's only in motion, but this card could represent a choice or staying on a path. And to me, I'm thinking that the control to keep it in bounds, to keep that vehicle in bounds, neither straying to the left side where there might be dependency on the practice or something, or to the right where it's rigid and set in stone for all people and for all time. So kind of the opposite of the flow mentioned earlier. So those were the ideas and cards that came to mind in meditation. Then I drew an Ohan stick with the associated oracle card from the Celtic Tree Oracle, and 3 tarot cards. And here's what appeared. The stick that I drew was Hwath, the hawthorn tree, with the thorns that can be of protection. Also, these trees were planted on the border, I've read, of property. And so we can see there, here's the associated oracle card from this deck is by Sherilyn Hidalgo, and this is the beautiful artwork there for Hwath, or the hawthorn. So this speaks to me of that protection, that limit, and this, again, the draw was just for my personal practice, not a general assessment. So just for me personally, as I think about these kind of practices, and maybe it could apply to, depending on what someone thinks is unusual, that could be a relative matter of perception there. But the topic kind of set by the Ohan stick was what limits to set, how to keep that border of protection if using these kind of practices. And I drew the 3 of Cups, the 9 of Pentacles, and the 4 of Cups. So let's look at these. The 3 of Cups tells me, I just read it for myself, as considering others' input. And so earlier I spoke of, so you may be in the broom closet, but there's a community, or there are others that, if not for accountability, at least for bouncing things off of and considering. This can give us discernment. This can give us a form of protection. And so that kind of fellowship, as seen in the 3 of Cups, reminds me of this. Now, often I'm married, I live in a family, so we often serve that role for one another. And while I would let it only go so far, either my input for them or theirs for me, but yet we do have that ability to help each other out. So this morning, when Kristen woke up, she said, I had a dream. Your window here by the altar was open. And this is before my meditation and this video, of course. And so later I recalled that and thought of how we can leave ourselves open if we don't have discernment or no one to give us input. We can just leave ourselves wide open. Now, maybe there's no danger. Maybe it's rare, or but on the other hand, maybe we're rolling the dice without that input or discernment. So it might be too lengthy and deep to go into, but in several times when in my practice, it's almost a synchronicity that Kristen has asked about something or caught me doing something that I had to test as to, is this something I can be authentic about, that I can feel fairly free exposing in at least some contexts. I know that sounds vague in general, but uh, I guess I'll leave it at that. But the the input of others. Let me go on to the Nine of Pentacles, and this speaks to me of the rewards of discipline. And so it's also, this is an individual card associated with the Hermit. So she is in her private garden enjoying these fruits. So in a sense, with the proper discipline, some of these practices are personal and not exactly to be submitted for accountability in some rigid sense. So, but again, just as the Chariot showed, there's some kind of discipline here. The trained falcon, the tended garden, her lavish fruits of her labors here in the garden. So the personal fulfillment, perhaps, that practices that might seem strange to others but fit us personally very well and are very fruitful. The last card was the Four of Cups, and it has the umbrella meanings for this are various for me, but one of those is that feeling of hangover, of overindulgence, of being so satiated that you know you've had too much to drink. And again, just one of the possible meanings, but this could be showing that warning from the Two of Coins to keep things in balance, not to stray into the overindulgence in the practices, not to allow them to become addictions. And similarly, this can kind of show how things come in cycles as well, and that there may be seasons and times when these practices can be brought in, and other times when they need to be dormant or put at rest or lie fallow. And this card has been called the Monday morning feeling. So when it's time to get back to the regular work, perhaps. And so this these cards have just served to help me reflect on what might be strange or unusual or personal practices. I'll stop there. I hope that's been interesting or helpful to others. And take care as always. I hope you find a connection with people in your life, with online community, and on your spiritual path. Whatever that might be. Take care.